Are you ready to become the balanced leader you are destined to become? Then stay right here. Welcome to today's Balanced Leader, where we empower today's leader to be the best that you can be, both in your professional and personal life. I'm your host, Caroline Baird, and I've explored and believe the intersection of wellness and leadership are key to finding the balance you are craving as a leader. This is the show where we focus on leadership and the importance of maintaining balance in today's fast-paced and constantly changing world. We talk about topics related to leadership, from communication and team building to personal development and finding balance during challenging times. We will also hear from inspiring guests who have achieved success in their fields and have valuable insights to share about their leadership journeys and on what it takes to be a successful leader. But this podcast isn't just about leadership, it's also about wellness too. Taking care of your mind, body, and spirit is essential to becoming a successful leader, and you'll get tips and strategies for living a healthy, balanced life, from managing burnout and improving mental health, to finding ways to reset and reground during a typical day at work so that you can achieve your goals. So whether you're a CEO, an entrepreneur, or just someone looking to improve your leadership skills, this podcast is for you. Are you ready? Well, let's get going. Hello, beautiful souls. I wanted to pop in and share a little bit about this episode. I am beyond thrilled to have a special guest, Elise Museles, joining me. Elise is someone I've admired for quite some time. Her dedication to holistic health and integrative healing is truly inspiring. I've been following her on Instagram and even purchased her book, Food Story, which completely transformed the way I think about food. You see, for me, food used to be just another item on my to-do list. Growing up with a mom who didn't really enjoy cooking, I never developed a deep connection with food. But thanks to Elise's wisdom, I've learned to see food as more than just sustenance. It's the fuel that nourishes my body, heals my fibromyalgia, and fills me with Mother Nature's love. Now, cooking has become a joyful experience for me. I crank up the upbeat music, dance around the kitchen, and infuse each dish with love. It's become a way for me to connect with myself and my loved ones, sharing laughter and creating memories around the dinner table. And speaking of empowerment, I'm thrilled to announce that I'll also be hosting a free workshop called Embrace Your Power on Wednesday, April 24th at 7 p.m. In this workshop, we'll dive deep into practical strategies for enhancing not only your emotional intelligence and self-worth, but just to give you that power back. It's all about reclaiming control of your life and living in abundance. Remember, it's never too late. So be sure to grab your seat through my website or by reaching out to me directly. I can't wait to help you rewrite your story and achieve your dream. Let's embrace our power together. Welcome to today's episode of Today's Balanced Leader. I'm super excited to have my special guest here today with us. Elise Museles is somebody that I've been following on social media for a long time, and we're going to talk a little bit about the journey, both of Elise and myself. But Elise holds 4 certificates in holistic health and integrative healing. So she is a wonderful guru around living well. She's on the Environmental Group Board of Directors and has been a National Institute of Health grant recipient for 5 years in a row, which is impressive. Congratulations. As a sought-after speaker, she is also host of popular Once Upon a Food Story podcast, which you have to listen to. Her work has been featured in O, the Oprah magazine, Forbes, Health, Self, Elle, Well and Good, The Chalkboard, Mind Body Green, and so many other avenues and outlets. Elise has many tools available, which we'll get to talk about, but I personally have not only visited your website for more information and recipes that I absolutely love, but you need to check out her book, Food Story, Rewrite the Way You Eat, Drink, and Live. And this book has really changed how I look at food, and hence had to have Elise on our podcast today. So welcome, Elise, to today's Balanced Leader.
Oh, well, thank you so much for having me, Caroline.
My
It's so
pleasure.
nice to see you. and see you, outside of our DMs on Instagram. So this will be a fun conversation, and I appreciate that introduction.
Oh, my pleasure. My pleasure. Lisa, I'd love to start so our readers can get to know a little bit about you. I'd love to hear a little bit about your story and around your connection between food and how we don't always tie it to the way we think and live, and hence your book. So we'd love to hear a little bit about your story.
Okay, well, if you ask my husband, he would say like I relate everything to food. Like, when my kids were growing up, I would say, like if one of them didn't feel well, I wonder what they ate. Like everything relates to food. But it does at the end of the day, a lot of it does come back to food is so powerful. I mean, it affects every cell in our body, including our brains and the way we think. And it gives us energy, it's connection, it's love, it's so much more than just fuel to me. And so that's why I think it, affects so much of who we are and how we show up. But I'm sure we'll get into that. So a little bit about my story is that so now, as you mentioned, I do nutrition and eating psychology. And before that, I practiced law in LA. And having grown up in California, I just had this long time passion for health and wellness. We didn't even call it that then, I don't even know what the names were, but just with food, movement, and so I had my kids after I practiced immigration law, and I actually really liked it. And the laws became so stringent that once I became a mother, it was really like hard to keep families together. And, after some point in time, I think administration changes, it was hard. I did, admittedly have a hard time keeping balance between family and, full time. Then I tried part time. And eventually I decided that I wanted to be with my kids for a little bit while trying to pursue this career in wellness. So that's when I did all the educating and got certified. And my biggest aha with, learning to like how I could support people wasn't just about what people were eating, because of course that's important. You want to like eat nutrients that support you and, make sure that you're balancing your blood sugar and all of that. But I felt like a huge missing link, and this was back in 2013, was like the how and why we're eating. And personally, my how was not, needed support. So when I decided to get a further certification in eating psychology, which really like looks at the mind of the eater, I realized, oh my gosh, I'm putting so much pressure on myself that even though I'm eating, beautiful food and making homemade food for my kids, even when they were babies, I would do that. I would put so much pressure on myself to be perfect and find the perfect diet that I was actually like releasing stress hormones, and making it not fun or pleasurable. And so it counteracted, all of the like good nutrients, with some of those stress hormones. And what I mean by that is when we are thinking stressful thoughts, whether they're true or not, our body produces cortisol. And you probably have talked about cortisol on this podcast before, but if anyone, hasn't heard of what that does, that it can affect your digestion, your nutrient assimilation. I mean, it's the stress hormones and the way that you process your food, basically. So once I learned how important it is to get our thoughts on track, I became certified in eating psychology, and I really made it my mission to support people, not just like with, what's on their plate, but also what's in their mind.
I love that because that is something that I think is often overlooked. Even individuals who prep their meals, right? Where you're like, okay, I've got to prep my meals for the week. I love that thought around having fun when you're prepping your meals so that you're putting that love and that intention into that food as well. Where, sometimes I know people get quite stressed when they're prepping their meals for the week, and it's that
Yeah.
next task that has to be done, or I've got an hour to get my meals prepped for the week, right? So I love rethinking and reframing how we approach food around fueling the vessel that is us for our journey while we're here, right? And one thing that I really enjoyed in your book, Elise, and I go back to on a regular basis, is the 8 Disempowering Food Stories,
Oh,
because I
sure.
can actually hear you speaking to me at times
Oh,
when
that's
I
awesome.
read these stories. Yeah.
So, okay, so first I want to address what you said about meal prepping because it's true. When we make meal prepping, or even like, oh my gosh, I just had the busiest day, I have to make dinner, like that have to dread thing. Everything we do is energy. And so when you are creating meals and putting your food together for the week or for your family or whatever, if you have that negative energy that goes into the food. And I know that might sound really woo woo, but it's true. And you can probably think to a meal you created that you were excited about, you gathered people around the table and there was just like that love poured into it. And so look, I know we have stress in our lives and it's hard to come home after like a full day, whatever that may be for you. And then the thought of cooking is just, not even remotely appealing. But there's so many ways that you can make it fun and simple. So first is not picking out a recipe that's like 20 steps, like just simplifying, roast some veggies, grill some protein, make your salad dressing ahead of time and wash your produce so you could toss the salad together. Simple, simple, simple is always better than complicated that adds stress. And then, put some music on, like I actually have a mood boosting kitchen playlist and I use it all the time. It's like a couple hours long, so I don't hear the whole thing every time. And it's fun. It's very upbeat and it just changes my energy. And music is so powerful in that way. So, or get other people, if you have a roommate or family members, a partner, get them involved so it's not always you doing everything, even if they're not cooks. You can still have them chopping or washing or setting the table. So I just wanted to address that it's all about the energy we put into it, and we really do have control over that. We can turn it into a more positive experience, even if you only have 20 minutes to get something on the table.
Agree. I often talk to my listeners too around how do you reset that mindset? So, coming home from that stressful day, right? It could be something as simple as a couple of deep breaths. Love the music piece. I don't even realize that I play music when I used to have the TV on in the background to catch up on the news, and I don't
Oh,
do
that
that
would,
anymore
yeah, that
because
might
that's
not put,
stressful.
that could be very stressful. So you asked about the 8 disempowering stories.
Yes.
So just for context for the listeners, in my book, Food Story, I talk about how I came up with the idea of a food story. And the way that happened is I was working with people and I'd say, tell me about your relationship with food. And most people would say, it's complicated, or do we have to? Let's not go there. And what was happening is I could tell they were just thinking about themselves and food. But when you really break it down, it's not just about you and food. It's about how you were raised, the messages you received growing up and the messages you're still continuing to receive from social media, best friends who are trying the latest thing, whether it's Ozempic or just some sort of like new lifestyle or cleanse. And so we constantly are bombarded with all of those messages and that noise, and it affects the way that we think about food and our choices. And we also have positive parts of our food story. So how we were raised with like family dinners or holidays, like some of that, your grandmother's meal that means so much to you. So basically what I'm saying is that we all have this story that comes together. And so it's not just like you and food, there's just all these layers to it. And so when I started talking about it as a food story, people would say, huh, I never thought about it as a food story. And then all these other parts would come in and they'd feel a lot less guilt and shame about what, some of their behaviors or patterns because they realize, wait, this isn't my fault. And I'm putting that in quotes. I shouldn't blame myself. This is how I grew up. This is what I learned, and so that's where food story comes in. And so when you ask me about the 8 disempowering stories, That's chapter 2 of my book. I needed the readers to be able to have a place to start. Because if you say, tell me about your food story, it's like, well, wait, I have however many decades of a food story, and where do I begin? So it was a really good starting point for people to identify a challenge. Like, what part of your story do you want to change or isn't really serving you? You may identify with parts of some of them, but it's like the story of perfectionism, which was my story because I was always looking for the perfect diet. Having grown up in LA, there was a lot of pressure, and so that was ingrained in me. But there could also be the story of overwhelm.
Right.
And so many of us feel that, especially today when we're like have so much coming at us. And then, there might be the story of later. And that's when you've got your kids, and it's not just necessarily kids, your job, promotion coming up, whatever it might be, the excuse, right? That I can't focus on this right now. I can't deal with this right now. I have too many other important things going on. One day later, I'll take my health into consideration. One day later, I'll start really meal prepping or doing the nourishing thing for myself. So you see that a lot, and you may not even realize that you're doing it, but that's a really popular story. So it's like there's the story of confusion, which I wouldn't blame anybody for being confused because there's so much research that contradicts the next research. And, it's hard to know, hey, which study is valid and I think you can kind of almost prove anything, and so that's a big story. So probably if you're listening now, like, well, I don't know, I might be a few of those things. That's true. And there might be times in your life where you're more one story than other, but this is just a starting point to think about what's a common theme for me.
And I love that you shared that. Thank you. Because definitely when I was in the corporate world, the story of later was where I was at.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And oh, one day I'll eat well, one day I'll, with a lot of things, right? I'll do this when and if. And then I agree when I started to have health issues that were stress and food related is when I started exploring and hence went into that confusion state. And I love to hear your thoughts around, and so I hired a naturopath, but I'd love to hear your stories, Elise, or your thoughts around what can our listeners do? Because we talk about eating well, where sometimes we don't want to go the fast food route, or now you can have food meals delivered to your home. And I think everybody's looking for that quick way to eat better, whether organic's better, whether it's not better. And I think eating whole and eating natural is definitely the way to go. But maybe you can share a little bit around what your thoughts are on if somebody is starting this journey, what are some of the things that they could observe or that they could do to take step one? And then I'd love for you to also share around kind of what you've learned by visiting farmers markets, because that
Mm.
in itself has
Okay.
taught me a lot.
Okay, so maybe I can blend those things because I mean, there's so many places you can start, and it just depends on everyone's individual story. But the farmer's market is a really great place to connect with your food, because you have an opportunity to talk to the farmer who grew it, but you're also seeing what's in season. And if we can eat a lot of our foods that are in season, a few things happen. One, it takes away from that decision fatigue, right? Like, what do I eat? Well, what's in season? So we're recording and it's spring. And spring is a lot of greens and asparagus, and like strawberries will come into season soon. You can use that as a guide to help you like make food around the seasonal produce. So that at least is a good starting point. But what's so interesting, I think, about the seasons that I love is that Mother Nature knows what our body needs. So greens in the spring, because we've just had more like heavier foods in the winter, so it's a little more cleansing. And the summer is all about hydrating foods. And I mean, I love that. I always do some sort of post about like eating your water because it's crazy how many like very high water content fruits and vegetables come into season in the summer, and that's when we need it. So you have tomatoes, cucumbers, lots of lettuce, and like just anything, all those fruits that are in season, like it's fruit season, and those are so juicy. Peaches, all of that helps hydrate your body, which we need because we're sweating more and outside, and just it's hot. So, and then in the fall, it's more grounding, the squashes that are more grounding, and we need that grounding energy after the summer. So I think looking to Mother Nature as a guide is amazing. And then something we sort of touched on is keeping it simple. So, this is kind of basic, but it works so well too, is like just making sure that you have a lot of color on your plate. And this is something that people might like roll their eyes or whatever, but every food that has a color offers different nutrients. So it's just a really great way to nourish your body with different phytonutrients. And also it's like, it looks pretty. I always like to give the example of oatmeal. Like if you have a plain bowl of oatmeal, it's beige, right? But then if you're adding the berries, and some like chopped up nuts or whatever, like, and you're just putting some whatever season apples and spices, and you're just putting toppings on that are of the season, it suddenly becomes more vibrant looking and exciting. And so same with your salad. If you do a Caesar salad, fine. But, if you're adding a ton of different colorful produce to the top of your salad, then you're getting all those nutrients and you're keeping it exciting too. So those are a couple ways. Yeah. And then what's really, really important, and you see a lot of conversation or hear a lot of conversation these days, is just making sure that you balance your blood sugar. So we were talking about fruits and vegetables, but we do want to make sure that, you're having some of the other macronutrients, meaning protein and fat, at your meals and snacks. So then with balanced blood sugar, so many positive things. You asked me about thinking and living.
Yes.
Like your brain chemistry is just more stable too. And your mood, when you're having all the different macronutrients represented at each meal. So you want to make sure not to just have the carbs straight up, but, to have some protein and fat with your carbohydrates.
I love that. And I think the colors, even the smells make such a difference, right? When they're in season, they have an aroma that is unique and different. And I
Yeah.
spoke with you just before we hit record, around living in a country that has winter where produce is shipped up from other places. And tomatoes don't have the smell in the winter that they do in the summer, right? When they're picked off the
Yeah,
vine.
that's so true.
And the nutrients obviously won't be the same then either. Not saying that you shouldn't have them because, that's what's available at the time. But when we can stick to the seasonal produce because it is Mother Nature has provided it for us in that season, the nutrients, but also the smell, the aromas, they blend more, they taste more flavorful. And I feel like that is part of the enjoyment that we get to have with food.
That's true. That's true. And also, like back to the farmer's market, like when you pick it yourself, there is something, like you're seeing all the colors together like that, and maybe having conversations with your farmer. It does connect you more to your food.
Yes. And I find too, since I've started watching more of the seasonal produce, whether fruits, vegetables, whatever, it has also allowed me, at least, to take recipes and try different things, right? Because your body will tell you indirectly, if you listen to it, what it is craving, what it
Hmm.
needs.
Hmm.
And I love that, where I can take a couple of recipes, if you will, and say, well, I don't have this ingredient today, but I have this. And I think,
I love that.
be
You're
as
so,
flavorful,
yeah.
right? So not always being stuck on a recipe, thinking outside the box and trying to be creative.
Yeah, or like using recipes as a guide. Like maybe you're not as comfortable in the kitchen to say, oh, let me just wing it, but then you can look at the recipe and like if you have peaches and not apricots, like you could pretty much, just swap that out or different kinds of nuts or what, and that even grains sometimes, you could use like if you don't want to use like couscous, you can put quinoa in or something. And so I think that that's just about feeling comfortable, and just saying, oh, what's the worst that happens? Look, nobody wants to waste food, but the worst that happens is it doesn't taste as good, right? But the one place where I don't make as many swaps, except for something like peaches and apricots, is baking. That's
Mhm.
way more of a science, and which is why I probably get enjoyment when I have baked things that turn out, but I'm actually prefer cooking over baking because I feel like there's more freedom in it. You can kind of like I like to cook intuitively. And that just means I kind of just put it together and taste but I do lots of recipes because, I create that for my community. But when I'm cooking myself, I don't really use recipes.
Sure.
Roasting vegetables, making a quick salad dressing. I know I have a little formula about 50-50, like the lemon to olive oil or something. But I think that sometimes people get caught up in feeling restricted with the recipe. And as long as you can use it and not let it stress you out and feel like it's a guide, then I think it just gives you it creates more ease, instead of what do I do? The other thing that I wanted to say, just to help people, I don't believe in meal planning every meal because I think that can actually add a lot of pressure because life happens or you may not feel like it. But I do believe in coming up with a loose idea of what you're going to make during the week because then you're more intentional when you're shopping.
Mhm.
You waste less. I mean, food waste is such a huge issue. And even people I know who are so evolved, they end up, telling me that they waste food and they're so upset with themselves. So just having some kind of a plan, like I'm going to make my quinoa this week or, a spring soup or whatever. And then when you're shopping, you can be more of a responsible, consumer instead of just like, oh, this looks good. And then getting home and not really knowing what you're doing with it.
I love that. Yeah. And I think so. I used to be, and I'll admit it, and I hate to, I used to be wasteful because I used to go and buy. And so, for an example, I would, when I got to the vegetable section, you would buy your staples, you would buy something new. Well, produce only lasts so many days,
Yeah.
right? And I would be sad because maybe I didn't finish all the peppers, for an example. And I quickly learned that, to your point, if I can semi plan the week, at least plan the first couple of days. I always
Hmm.
have the opportunity to make soups, stews, etc. later on in the week. And typical, right? Open the fridge is what they used to do. What have I got and what can I put in it? And sometimes that's where you get to be creative and have a little bit of fun.
Yeah. Yeah, I know. And don't be afraid to have fun. The other thing you could put at the front of your refrigerator, the foods that are most perishable, so it just depends what you have. Usually the sturdier, harder foods, the root vegetables, all that will have a longer shelf life
Right.
in the fridge. So you can just rearrange your fridge so you see what's most perishable first. It's such a bad feeling throwing out. I mean, you work so hard, the farmer works so hard, it's wasteful for everyone. So it's good to have some kind of intention when you're going grocery shopping or to the farmer's market.
Right. What would you say? Because I want to carry on our conversation around the food stories, if you will. When we think about our relationship with food, things are going to change. We talked a little bit about it before we started recording about we're going to be in different phases in our life. So foods that maybe we craved or needed early on, we've changed. Can you share a little bit around what you've learned around our journeys and maybe through the decades of how food stories change?
Sure. I think that I've been doing this thing recently where I end sentences with right now and because people feel like either they're trying to do something they did a long time ago that might not work for them. So, the most obvious example are the seasons. We just eat differently in winter than we do in summer. We feel
Right.
different. Our bodies need different nutrients and, our activity levels are different. There's so much that changes season to season. So that's an obvious one, but also our hormones change, our desires, our goals, like just everything evolves. And if it stayed the same, that'd be so boring, right? So being open to knowing that what you're doing is working for you right now. And those are the two words that I use. Like, because right now is going to feel different, to you maybe in a year. Or like, even if you think about what we all went through with the pandemic, so much changed afterwards. We might prioritize our health in a different way. So I think just knowing also this goes along with the idea of having a story that like you enter different chapters, right? And you're the author. So you can choose how you want it to be. Maybe your kids, you're no longer cooking for a family, you're an empty nester. And so like what you do with food, the way you stock your fridge, that probably is going to be different now. And so just really, I think being flexible, knowing that it's going to evolve, knowing that your right now is going to feel different than your right now in a month or 3 months or whatever, however long, and being okay with that, So I hope that answers your question.
It does. Yeah,
Okay.
it absolutely does. I find so many people stuck in their ways, and you had spoken to it earlier around we learn our habits a lot of times from our mothers, our grandmothers, etc., right? And we have comfort food. We all have
Oh,
some form
yeah.
of comfort food that makes us feel good, makes us feel loved, particularly when we're not feeling well. If you're sick, you may
Yeah,
go to that chicken noodle soup or whatever that is.
exactly.
But I think you get to, and you've spoken a lot about it, write your story around what that looks like and perhaps create different traditions or comfort foods, not only for yourself, but for your family. Because I think it is such a gift to be able to teach your kids how to prep a meal for themselves very
Hmm.
simplistically. Because, when they go off to university, the last thing you want them doing is one, not being able to eat, or two, not being able to eat well, especially when they're under potentially a lot of stress and change in their life, potentially for the first time they've been on their own, right?
Yeah, so let me address that last point about the kids because just like you're born into a food story, you're passing on a food story. So you might do things for better or worse, just depending on what it is that you're like, oh my gosh, I'm my mother. We all do that, right? You catch yourself with a habit or just like, and it just happens and it's natural and it's not necessarily a negative thing, like but it might be something you want to change for you. But just think about like, your kids are watching you, they're absorbing some of the things you say and what you do and the way you do dinner, and that becomes their comfort because that's what they know. And so even if they rebel, like, that happens, or they're not like interested in cooking for themselves or passing on, like doing some of the things that you're trying to instill in them, it's ingrained in them. And there will be a time. So my older son was always really into cooking. And that was amazing. Like that he was helpful in the kitchen. He would sometimes cook all the dinners. My younger son would sit at the bar stool and be like, hey, what's for dinner? And like I was just like, oh my gosh, what the heck is he gonna do? Because he has like two people cooking for him, serving him, and he comes home with all his friends and they're like getting my son and I are cooking for them. But you know what happened? A few years into college, he started shopping at the farmer's market and cooking for himself because that's what he knew. So it may not happen right away. And I know it's super frustrating as a parent to think like, who am I doing this for? They're not eating the broccoli or whatever. But you got to just keep showing them, and also modeling. So show, don't tell is so powerful. Instead of eat your whatever, your vegetables, your color, your broccoli, like you need to be eating those things too and have them see you, or you need to be looking in the mirror without making a face or a negative comment if you want them to have that same sort of, response to the way that they see themselves. So a lot happens that's also unsaid, and it's just not to make people paranoid, but to know like, just like you can pass on a negative food story, you have the same ability to pass on a really powerful food story. So if there are things that you need to work on, like you don't just do it for you, but you do it for your kids and their kids too.
I love that. I absolutely love that. And right away, I went to the, do my children think prepping meals is fun or is it stressful? Right? And
Mhm.
I've got to question that because for a long time it was stressful. I was the come home late at night and oh my
Yeah.
gosh, if I don't eat now, it's going to be bedtime. So you'd throw something quick together, which was not done with love, with enjoyment. And I think as time evolved, we started to bring the kids into the kitchen.
Oh, nice.
It's going to be a family event, if you will, and that
Hmm.
started to make it more fun, definitely, because you could also chat about the day, but you could be playful about it, which you find if your kids don't talk to you, that's a great way to get them to open up because they don't even realize they're doing it.
Yeah, that's so nice. So you mentioned we talked about meal planning, but just
Yes.
like and like meal prep feeling stressful. There's you can take some time on the weekend to do it if that works, but there aren't any rules with meal prep except maybe our rule, which is to not make it stressful. But you can just also make extras, or like if you've put something in the oven for dinner, then you can make a quick batch of chia pudding or overnight oats, so you could do it as you go so that it doesn't feel like, oh, I need 3 hours to meal prep for the week. But you could just throw it, if you're making a salad, make a little extra for the next day and just put it in a container or make the salad dressing double it, so then you have it ready to go. So there are ways that you could do it that don't really take extra time. You just have to be like a little bit creative and say, I'm doing this for future me or
I
for
love
my
that.
future
Yes.
family. Yeah.
Yes, yes, that is so important. You're right. Because you don't realize that you've got the time. Why not do it and make the day that's you can give yourself free time, or maybe you don't have a time that day because you know you're going to be busy that day. So that's a great hint. Can you share a little bit around your thoughts or the psychology? I know I've struggled with this food story where sometimes guilt comes into play.
Mm,
So, you're eating well, and maybe there's a day where you fall off, or a day where you decide that you want that delicious looking cake that you know is probably not what you should be eating. But I think sometimes, and I had a friend actually say this, that if you are grateful and appreciative of the food and truly enjoy it, it doesn't put, and I know she's saying that, maybe it's true, it doesn't put the weight on you as if you're eating it with guilt and with shame
mm,
while you're digesting it. Would love to hear your thoughts on that.
Okay, sure. So guilt is a huge theme for a lot of people. And it's probably something that we learned, and that, it's not spoken of as much, so it stays kind of trapped inside. I feel guilty. And we just know it. So it's like a reflux. So a couple things, does it really serve a purpose? Like if like it takes away from any sort of enjoyment that you would have had. So I used to work with people and ask them to say, you have two choices right now. You can eat, whatever, the cake, we'll give that as an example since you brought it up, and enjoy it. Or you can decide, I don't want to eat the cake because I don't like how I feel afterwards, like whether that's a physical thing or mental, but don't eat the cake and then feel bad about it. Because like that's like a lose-lose situation, right? So I think you have to make a decision. But sometimes when we feel bad about it, it might be because it doesn't agree with us. It's
Right.
not necessarily because we think we shouldn't have had the cake, but it's like doesn't agree with our system, whether it's, gluten or dairy or whatever it might be, that, or the sugar, like you're super sensitive.
Right.
So I think like, peeling back the layers is always a good thing, but not in the moment because that just like feeds the guilt, but just afterwards, like, okay, what can I learn from this experience? Was my body trying to tell me something? Or like, do I need to change my mindset around it? And to address what your friend said, what I think your friend was talking about is what I shared at the beginning of the episode, and that's the physiological stress response that comes with guilt. So I was saying how I was finding the perfect body too, but perfect food, perfect diet. And that was affecting the way my body was responding to it. So what happens is when you're stressed, that's the cortisol. That's when you don't digest, metabolize, process, and have as much pleasure from your food. And so if all of that is working more efficiently, so if you had a couple bites and you're like, okay, I satisfied my craving and now I'm done. To your friend's point, it was like you got to enjoy it, have a little bit, and then just like move on. And I can't say anything about the actual weight gain. I don't think you gain weight from one time. You know what I mean?
Piece of chocolate
So
cake.
yeah. But I just think that your body is going to digest it the way it should, instead of your stress hormones getting in the way.
Yes. Yes. The psychology of how our mind works and the relationship to food is very interesting. I've always been intrigued by it.
Yeah, me too,
Yeah.
still,
Yes.
because our thoughts are so powerful. And so many of us have these like unprocessed emotions and, like things that like beliefs, they're limiting beliefs sometimes, about food or things that like we've just believed them because we have, and there actually is no truth to them,
Right.
you know?
Yes.
I have a chapter in the book on that.
You do. You do.
Yeah.
That's very good. I still want to talk a little bit about your book, and I'd love to hear, if you want to kind of give your thoughts around the book and how it can help. I'd like to share as well, but you've also got a podcast, Once Upon a Food Story. So I'd love to kind of hear what your thoughts are on what the book can bring to people, what your podcast can bring to people, and then I've got a last question for you.
Okay, amazing. Okay, so I started my podcast Once Upon a Food Story because I feel like, just like you're doing, that we all connect through our stories, and it makes us feel less alone, especially like the food stories. There is some, shame or guilt or just like embarrassment over some of our behaviors or thoughts or things that have been passed on to us. And so when somebody, you may not have the exact story, but when a guest comes on and they're sharing their story, and usually with that story, there's like a triumph, and then I went into this career, or then like there's something that came from it, a big lesson, a big aha. By sharing our stories, I really hope people see themselves or parts of their stories, and it can help them heal, And so I just love talking to my guest about like snippets, parts of their stories that they may never have spoken about before. And I get a lot of guests afterwards who said, whoa, I didn't even know that that affected me so much, or I've never shared that before. And I always love that. So that's where it came in. And also, as my podcast has grown, I start talking about other things that might be like, well, wait, what the heck does this have to do with a food story? So I'll give you an example. I had an organizer on twice, actually, but she was like 100 episodes apart. But that's one of my most recent, maybe you'll link to it in your show notes. It's all about how having an organized space can affect your brain, your mind, your mood, your food choices, right?
Yeah.
And so while that may not seem like it's a part of your food story, I personally know my closet is disaster and I feel stressed. I feel stressed getting dressed. I feel stressed about like finding the right thing that looks good for whatever my purposes of, where I'm getting dressed for or to do. And so, but if my closet was clean, so your kitchen, if it's a mess, if it's not organized, if you just have like things you're not using right up at the front, that affects your food story. And there's so many little things that we do that affect our food story that people may not realize. So I love sharing those parts of people's food stories. So then they could say, I wonder if I spent an afternoon or an hour cleaning my kitchen, if I'd feel better when I walked in and I could meal prep because I wouldn't feel stressed by the big mess. So,
And I think too, sometimes we purchase things and they end up getting shoved into the back. And so, my food story was after I left the corporate, well, prior to leaving the corporate world, I started to not feel well. And I didn't know why. I was tired all the time. I felt like I had brain fog. I didn't know what was going on. Fast forward, because it took me probably close to 10 years, but
Wow.
I would travel a lot. So, you know, every month, maybe 1 to 2 weeks out of the month, I would travel on a plane and go
That's a
somewhere,
lot.
and was eating at hotels. And so not
Hmm.
making the right choices, not prepping. And I know you do this a lot when you're traveling, where you can, you prep and take things with you. Or once you get there, you go, like what you're in DC, when you go to California, you go to that farmer's market and
Yeah.
purchase things. And I purchased your book, and then I stopped working in the corporate world. One of the first things I did after I read the eight Disempowering food stories, I started to see some of that. And so one of the things that I learned quickly, because I have fibromyalgia and degenerative arthritis, is there were certain foods that I couldn't eat. Saw a
Hmm.
naturopath, found out about my gut health, found out about which foods were good for me, which foods my system didn't really enjoy. And so it was a great opportunity to open the cupboards and kind of get rid of the food that no longer served or resonated
Yeah.
with me. And I've been very selective in, and still not great, but very selective in what now I put in the cupboard, so that it's the things that can love me as much as I can love it, right? And so
Hmm.
I can love my
Hmm.
meal because I've bought this beautiful food that wants to provide me with nutrition, with energy, etc. And so between the podcast and the book, absolutely have loved the transformation and the learnings, because I won't say that I'm perfect when it comes to the psychology and the science of it, but your
But
book
that's
definitely
okay.
speaks to it a little bit, right?
Yeah. Oh, so, well, first of all, that's so great that you've been on this healing journey. And healing does take time if it's like a lifetime of habits and thoughts, and like people should just give themselves the space to know every time you do something that feels good, that's one step closer to understanding your body. So I think that's awesome. And so my book, they have they're similar, right? And
Yeah.
so that in that there's stories and that's the similar theme, and that we're all connected and it's a safe space to explore. But the book really has other aspects to it that like the conversations on the podcast are deep and you can really listen in. Like I feel like the way my podcast is, people feel like they're having tea with us or coffee or whatever.
Love that.
And so with the book, it's really more about you, and so there are a lot of exercises you could do. There's even, a fill in the blank for your food story. And it's kind of, I made it sort of fun because how do you write out your whole food story? But then this has prompts and it's easy, to start thinking about it. And of course, like once you start thinking about it, then when you put the book in between reading the different chapters, you'll think about more things. So I feel like they're complementary but different, and everyone learns differently.
Right.
Some people need to hear, some people want to just be in their own head. And together, I feel like it's a whole picture.
It is. It's great. And one of the other pages that I earmarked that I wanted to share out of the book was that I love is the Choose Your Mood smoothie bowls. And I love how literally, whether you want to feel happy, calm, sensual, comforted, radiant, strong, focused, you give suggestions on what are the foods that can help accentuate those feelings. And I
Hmm.
love how it's a quick little, I can just flip it open and kind of go, oh, you know what? So today blueberries and banana are the way that I want to go with zucchini avocado because I want to feel calm, right? And if I don't have everything, it's okay. I still can
Yeah.
build towards it. And so between that, and I just want listeners to know Elise also has a website where you can grab free recipes, which are simple. And that's really what I stand for, is all about coming
Hmm.
back to that simplicity in life. I think we've made things very complicated, very materialistic to some degree, and have lost that connection with Mother Nature, Earth, true whole foods, making life simple. And around it's never too late to start to make that shift, because it's your body may be screaming at you.
I agree. Those are all good things. And I love how you want to keep it simple because like we're coming full circle, like we said at the beginning, that simple is best. And that's when you'll follow through with it.
Yes, yeah.
Yeah.
Elise, what would you say is the biggest thing that you've learned throughout your journey that you could share with the listeners? You know, whether it's a transformation, a lesson, anything like that that you found has had a profound impact for you.
Well, to like kind of piggyback onto what you said, that it really is about those foundations that we make wellness and feeling good so complicated. You know, you have to take the 12 supplements, and sometimes you do, but you have to take the supplements, you have to follow this protocol and that protocol. And, you know, half the times, more than half the times when I'll talk to people, are you drinking enough water? I could be better. How's your sleep? I could be better. Those things that are so basic can totally change how you feel in your body and change your life. So I think that we should really focus on the foundations first, and then of course, if you have some sort of other nagging issue, but like making sure you're balancing your meals and eating your meals, by the way, too, hydrating, sleeping, moving your body, watching your thoughts. We talked about twice, today how powerful our thoughts are. And just those sort of basic things, getting a little bit of sunlight, which is such a mood booster. I go into nature every day, and that has completely shifted things for me. So just like you stand for keeping it simple and just not laughing at the foundations and bypassing them and thinking you need to go do something really elaborate. Do all the foundations and see how you feel. Because I have a feeling most people could improve in some way with those basics.
I don't disagree. And I think it's stopping, pausing, and listening to what your body is telling you. A
Yeah,
lot of times we push through, and there are times we need to push through, but I think you need to take those times to stop. And through movement, that's one thing I've started doing every day, as long as it's not horrible, horrible weather outside, I will go for a walk first thing. And it's amazing how it'll change your thought process and your mindset throughout your day.
it
Yeah.
is amazing.
Yes.
Amazing. So,
I also want to talk about some things that Elise has available, and I'll definitely put the links for your podcast, for your book in there. But also, you've got a free ebook called The 5 Easiest Ways to Stop Stressing About Food, and I'll put that in there. I don't know if you want to talk a little bit about that. And then there's also an awesome product that you can buy for a low ticket. It's $47. It's called the Food Mood Bundle. So if you'd like to share a little about those before we close, that'd be great.
oh, sure. Okay. Well, just, we found each other on social media. So I'm on Instagram, my name, Elise Museles. And then, like you said, my website has a lot of content on it. And then, the podcast, that's like definitely, I love being a host. That's just been such a rewarding experience for me. The book is wherever books are sold. And then the 5 easy ways to stop stressing about food, we covered some of those things, but it's a really good entry point into like helping you think thoughts that are more nourishing, basically. And then the food mood bundle, I love that. I love that product. It's just, I wanted to have something that people could use at any time. It's a digital download, but it's interactive, so that there's like questions and prompts. There's a playlist, a kitchen mood boosting playlist, that there's different recipes all by mood. There are 4 moods in this version of the food mood bundle. And I actually recorded my chocolate meditation. So you could do a chocolate meditation to help you become present with your food. And there's just a lot packed in there. And like you said, it's a great product. I don't even know. I mean, I feel really proud of it. It's beautiful and it's interactive, so and you keep it for life.
I
You can
love
always
that.
refer back to it. So thank you
Yes.
for mentioning it, and I'll get you that link.
Of course. Yeah, I'll include that in the link in our show notes. But Elise, such a pleasure to have you on our podcast today. I thank you so much. It's been definitely very informative and hopefully inspirational for our leaders. I know it's something that I've been striving for and looking for ways to make people's lives simpler, but give them ways to introduce things or think about things differently. And I think just having the conversation around our food stories will trigger a lot of thought-provoking conversations out there. So thank you so much for your time.
Oh my gosh, thank you so much for hosting this and for what you're doing and for helping leaders. And I appreciate you. And
Thank
it was
you.
an honor to be a guest here.
Thank you so much. My pleasure. And everyone, check out all the goodies that Elise has to offer, and I'll make sure I include all those in the show notes. Thanks again for listening to today's episode. That's all for this episode of Today's Balanced Leader. I hope you've enjoyed the discussion on wellness and leadership, and that you took away some valuable insights and strategies to help you become a better leader in your own life. Please leave a rating and review. I'd love to hear from you. And if you enjoyed this episode, be sure to subscribe so that you don't miss the next one, as we continue our exploration of what it means to live life as today's leader. In the meantime, take care of yourself and remember that true leadership starts with taking care of your own well-being. One deep breath in and one deep breath out. Keep striving for excellence and inspiring others to do the same. And finally, thank you for listening, and I'll see you next time on Today's Balanced Leader.